Welcome to today's episode of Buildings Hub Live, where we spotlight the changemakers and technologies leading the charge to electrify our built environment. On our podcast, we tackle the issues facing building decarbonization, from space heating to electric cooking to building codes and beyond. On this episode, we'll chat with Andy Johnson, Executive Director of Clean Energy Districts of Iowa. How do neighbors work together to inspire action and collaboration at the local level? What can we learn from other environmental and economic efforts, especially in rural areas? Stay tuned to find out about the Clean Energy District model and how its proponents aim to help their neighbors live more comfortably and lower their energy bills. Here's your host, Atlas Public Policy Analyst Stephen Naimoli.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 17th episode of Buildings Hub Live. My name is Stephen Naimoli, Policy Analyst at Atlas Public Policy, and I have the honor of being your host today. For today's episode, we will be discussing clean energy districts. What do they look like, and how do they work to ingrain building efficiency and energy savings into communities from the bottom up? Stay with us to find out. Before we jump into our discussion today, a quick note on Buildings Hub. Here at Atlas, we manage a one-stop shop data analysis tool for building sector electrification called Buildings Hub. If you're interested in heat pump market data, state buildings, policies, and funding programs, the current makeup of the U.S. housing stock, federal grants, and crisply designed dashboards, we've got you covered. We've got some great content coming to you soon, including a data story on 2 years of the Inflation Reduction Act and some data updates on household energy consumption and expenditures. We encourage you to register for our platform and check out our data features. We'd love to have you join the Buildings Hub community. As for this episode, we're currently live on LinkedIn and YouTube. We encourage our audience to send us your questions via the Q&A portal on our YouTube live stream, and we will work them into the discussion. We look forward to hearing from you throughout the episode. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce our special guest today. We're joined by Andy Johnson, Executive Director of the Clean Energy Districts of Iowa. Andy, thank you so much for being here with us today.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
We've got lots to cover and only half an hour, so let's get right to it. To start off, please tell us a little bit about your organization and where the idea came from for the Clean Energy Districts of Iowa.
Sure. So I grew up on a dairy farm here in northeastern Iowa, county called Winneshiek, which is where I'm talking to you from right now. Was away for quite a while, worked in the conservation field, natural resources, so related to energy, but not focused on energy. But anyway, moved back after about 20 years away. And to be clear, I was one founder of this effort, one among a group, because upon moving back here to this rural county, there were a number of folks already working. This was in the early mid-aughts of working on clean energy transition, looking at how to institutionalize that or create an organization of some form to help folks, energy users in our local governments and institutions move in the direction of clean energy transition. And so I was able to join that work. One of the pieces of the puzzle I brought to the conversation was in having worked in the conservation world, including with soil and water conservation districts. And that is a model that's really interesting, comes out of the New Deal. We could maybe get into it a little bit more when talking about the model, but I brought that idea here into the local discussion and said, look, I actually don't live in town in our little county seat here called Decorah. I live in the country. I grew up in ag country. And if we're going to work on an organization that is going to try and help the people in the community and the businesses and institutions move in the direction of clean energy, my interests lie in not just a town effort, but in something that's more geographically inclusive, the county, the rural parts, areas as well. And so that led to the formation of what was the first energy district, Winneshiek Energy District, Winneshiek being the name of our county. So we created a nonprofit. We said, we're going to see what we can do in promoting clean energy here locally. And we hit the ground running with some ARA funds, some federal funds from the stimulus package of the 2009 era. We officially formed and kicked off in 2010. So that was the beginning of it. But like I say, it was a pretty hefty couple of handfuls of local folks who jumped into that effort, many of whom are still working on it today. So that's really gratifying. And from there, it spread, and we can touch a little bit more on that.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. Thank you. So particularly thinking about the different kinds of efforts that you've worked on over the years in conservation as well as in energy, what makes the Clean Energy District model unique?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there are many efforts, sort of community-based efforts around the country, certainly doing great work on the clean energy transition. I think some key aspects of the energy district model that are unique include what I mentioned, the geographic and socioeconomic inclusivity. We're not town-based. We are at the county level based. And so those borders abut each other. So in Northeast Iowa now, we have a number of energy districts that cover the entire territory. It's not just a metro area. And yet it is still locally led. So we like to promote ourselves as the growing network of universal local clean energy implementation institutions, so to speak. Another unique aspect is that we really focus on technical assistance. We start by saying, look, we really need to try and put those boots on the ground, the energy auditors / planners. Just an audit is not enough. You need a whole planning process that helps those customers actually do the work. But we try and do technical assistance. That costs money to put boots on the ground. So we have to pursue grant funds for that. Sometimes we can charge fees, but it's a whole hodgepodge. That's not easy. And there are solutions for that as we grow, ideally, with public partnerships. But another aspect then is market transformation. So yes, of course, we do public engagement and education. That's often where many nonprofits lead. That's kind of the back end of what we do. When we lead with technical assistance, and that moves into market transformation, where we partner very closely with different sectors of the economy, for example, contractors and community colleges, to do trainings so that electrical contractors can get really good at solar and can dominate the solar market, as opposed to having fly-by-night companies from out of state come through, which we've seen in many places, not here. We had, by probably 2014, 2015, we had close to half a dozen solar contractors in the small rural Iowa county, long before anyone else, many other folks in the Midwest were even thinking about solar still. So that market transformation is really important. The banks, the financial institutions, the same way. So really trying to ensure that all cylinders of the clean energy economy are firing, because if something gets off, the engine doesn't run very well.
That's great. Thank you. Well, you mentioned that, kind of this, you've started and then in one county, and it's kind of been spreading. By my count, it looks like you've got, from your website, about 14 districts across Iowa. Is that the latest?
13 in Iowa and 1 in Wisconsin that is a member of the Clean Energy Districts of Iowa. And maybe, hopefully, there will be more there, and they'll start their state association. So
absolutely. And I do want to come back to the kind of moving to other states as well. But just getting to, you've got 13 in Iowa and 1 in Wisconsin. So what do you find tends to push people to start a clean energy district?
Yeah, that's actually one of the most exciting questions and answers, because it's super gratifying. When we started Winneshiek, we had this dream that said, look, the model, ideally based on that soil and water district model, should be replicable, but we just have to make something happen here. And within a few years, we had champions in neighboring counties where we had sort of started to do a little bit of work just in spilling over county lines. But clean energy champions saying, you know what, we'd like to do that here too. And that was exactly what we wanted to hear, because we didn't want to just get bigger as an organization. We were county level, and localism is critically important to this work. Local leadership, local trust, community building. So we started working with those champions in other counties. And I think a really big part of what attracts people to the model is we know there are clean energy champions everywhere. There are community builders everywhere. But how to get the work done. This model is one of creating an organization or an institution, we like to think, institutionalizing the clean energy transition. So once you join an organization, you're part of a group, you have a bit of a soapbox, a bit of a mouthpiece, and you have a mechanism to try and bring resources in and actually do projects. So you're not working alone, but you are part of a network, at least the way we're building it in Iowa. So this network of clean energy districts, we work together. We're always partnering with each other and sharing resources and ideas and success stories. So,
to that end, you mentioned the importance of localism. Can you talk a little bit more about what the advantage is there, and where you see the ability for localism to kind of help push for these sorts of issues?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that this phrase universal local institution. If you think about it, obviously we're a polarized society increasingly, right? We have a lot of divisions and a pretty great lack of trust often in our institutions. But I think that trust is better at the closer you are to home. And I think we've always found that. This is not new in our history. And people generally engage and trust more with the organization and institutions, and that includes local government and local media. Now, that's not to say there aren't divisions. Even right down here at the county level in Iowa, we certainly have them. Even rural-urban divide exists right here, sure. But the level of trust and community sort of spirit is still there, and it's still greater than you might see at higher levels. And so I think that really matters. Trust especially matters when it comes to clean energy, because for energy end users, the businesses and farms, the households and institutions, we all know, I think most people would say, sure, I know, I could probably save money by doing this or that, whether it's changing all my lighting or tightening up the home, or maybe thinking about a new water heater. And we're all kind of paralyzed, partly because we don't have the bandwidth, but partly because we don't want to waste money and we don't really know where to start. We're not confident that, we're going to do the right thing. And so providing really quality technical assistance locally, those kind of energy auditors / planners are trusted. And that's what enables people to really go ahead and make those decisions and move from the, back burner, from the we should list to the honey-do list, and let's get this work done. There's a big opportunity there that's not being filled. And so that's why we say we need this universal local implementation infrastructure. Rebate programs, energy efficiency incentives, policies at the state and federal level, all that's important, but none of it gets much traction relative to the opportunity at the local level without this universal local implementer. So this is kind of a real leveraging and magnifying structure. And then one other thought on this too, though, is just there's a broader principle at work here that many folks, both in religion and in governance and political science, refer to as subsidiarity principle, which is basically the idea that, in social and political organizations, when things need to be done, they should be done at the lowest, most local level possible to be most effective. And that's also what we're talking about here. We're not saying that we don't need good policy at the state and federal level, but we're saying the implementation really should be at the local level with support from those state and federal levels, rather than just trying to have, there is no universal implementer. There's no federal agency that runs around doing energy audits, right? There's no state agency that does that in almost any state. There are energy efficiency programs often run by utilities, kind of a conflict of interest, not usually in the interest of a utility to reduce the sale of their principal product. So those technical assistance programs generally aren't very effective. So we think there's a real gap there, and that's what we're trying to fill.
Yeah, I think our audience can definitely appreciate that, for the building sector and for a lot of these solutions, like the implementation happens on the local level, from whether it's from even just the building codes and the planning process to the actual, the installations, the contractors, all of that work ultimately happens in the home or in the building.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about kind of the profile of clean energy districts? So, are you typically seeing them coming up in rural areas or urban areas, or disadvantaged communities, affluent communities, communities with energy development, things like that? Are there any patterns that you've seen?
Yeah, so the pattern initially was, here we are in Winneshiek, and this group of people decided to start, and we're very rural. So it started in a rural area. You could say very, very grassroots. And because we're in a very rural corner of the state, there's no urban area anywhere near us. Our neighboring counties that were the next to jump on and form energy districts, also very rural. So the first three were entirely rural counties. And And then the fourth was actually because we started building regional partnerships and was an urban county, Dubuque in Iowa. And then we had another rural county or two, and then Lynn County in Iowa and Johnson County and Polk County are the three probably largest, certainly two of the three largest metropolitan counties in the state. So it's become something that really, we were wondering for a little while, is this something that is mostly going to stay rural? Not yet. Though, you can imagine there's very different challenges for a county level organization. That our county here, Winneshiek, has 20,000 people and 7,000 in the little county seat here of Decorah, versus a metropolitan county that, has 250,000 or 500,000 in Iowa. So, one of those energy districts there, and our energy districts in the network are at all different stages of development. They're all nonprofits, so everyone needs to try and build some resources, and that's not easy, to try and put resources, to work or put boots on the ground. So they're at all different stages, and the metropolitan energy districts are really working hard to try and sort of compartmentalize a little bit, and on the one hand, maybe work with local governments that could be covering the whole county or the metro area on specific policies like ordinances, which they are doing and have done very, very impactfully. And on the other hand, think about, well, what does technical assistance look like for a population this large? Do we need to subdivide? Do we need to have neighborhood groups, associations part of this work? So that's all very much in the early stages. But the champions are there and starting to try and make it work. So
that's really interesting, and it's also refreshing to hear that there is a diversity of communities that are interested in this work and kind of getting it out there. So that's lovely. You mentioned the kind of ability or necessity of some districts to work with their local government. How do the districts tend to interact with local, state, or potentially even federal governments?
Yeah, that's a lot of different questions in one, because utilities are entirely different animals in the energy world than local governments. As a local institution, local organization, we certainly do everything we can to partner, and we have partnered with dozens of different kinds of organizations and groups doing different work, from the local governments to community action agencies and councils of government to school systems, et cetera, et cetera. In large part, wherever we can be the trusted source of information, because oftentimes local institutions, especially in rural America, but also in urban America, don't necessarily have those experts on staff, and are looking. And we may not have the experts on staff either, but we're pretty well plugged in, and so we can find them, and so we try and bring, if we don't have the answers, we can try and bring the experts into the room to help these partners figure things out, whether it's looking at what their opportunities are in energy efficiency programs, to looking at local policy issues around solar or wind or siting or things like that. So local government partnerships are the run-of-the-mill status quo. That's what we do frequently. State and federal government is a little bit different because, of course, in that sense, we are local. Our association, SETI, the Clean Energy Districts of Iowa, is our network association here to both serve the local energy districts, try and help them bring some resources in, but also then our association is here to work on state policy, to try and advocate for state policies in the energy sphere that support what the local energy districts are trying to do, which is the clean energy transition, local ownership of energy assets, keep those doors open. And so, yes, we do engage, especially at the association level in state policy. We engage both at the regulatory arena and our utility commission on rate dockets and energy efficiency dockets and net metering dockets, those kind of things. That work is pretty intense. It takes some resources. We do everything we can to scrape things together and bring some good voices to the table there. And then we engage at the legislative level when we need to, for example, if net metering is under threat. Or at this point right now in Iowa, we really need and don't have integrated resource planning, a pretty basic tool, but pretty important to help keep rates down and look at, fairly across the board at what the new options should be for our utilities. So we engage in that way. Now, I'll save this till later. Utility engagement, though, I think was one thing you also mentioned. And we work as closely as we can with utilities. We are not a utility, clearly. We're trying to do the technical assistance and market transformation work. And increasingly, we have always engaged extensively, especially with consumer-owned utilities, which makes a lot of sense because they're locally owned. They're based in the communities where we work. So rural electric co-ops, municipal utilities. Iowa actually has a larger number of those than just about any other state. And there are a lot of opportunities there. So we have a number of good partnerships that have happened and happening there. The investor-owned utilities, a little bit of a different animal. We partner in some areas and in other areas, like we're trying to keep rates down when the rates are going up. So, we're trying to keep net metering open when the utility may not want to do that. So, of course, there are areas where we disagree there too.
With utilities and beyond, how can the private sector support clean energy districts?
Yeah, so I guess I'll answer this a bit, the private and the public sector. The vision here, the North Star is if energy districts, if clean energy districts at the county level and a universal local implementation infrastructure are actually going to expand to become universal. In Iowa, we have 99 counties. In the country, we have 3,000 counties or something. So, is that a wild dream or is it a realistic aspiration? For that to work, we would need both significant partnership from the public and the private spheres. And briefly to sketch it out, the private sphere, we do have some good partnerships with a few foundations. It's been very modest, but it's hopefully growing. And the idea is we hope to continue to grow this clean energy district model, both inside Iowa and beyond, in ways that show its effectiveness and impact. And we think we've had tremendous impact already. But if we can continue to grow that model, then eventually we need to be able to take the model to state legislatures, for example, and say, look, you have other examples of universal local implementers, universal local institutions that you already support. And it takes very little money to do that, like the soil and water conservation districts. Every state in the country has some version of resource conservation districts or soil and water conservation districts that grew out of the New Deal era. And those are implementers of the conservation programs together with state and federal agencies. And they are very effective and they don't take a whole lot of money. And so what we're saying is, look, in energy, there's a big gap there. And we're showing that it can work similarly, that we can lead with the technical assistance and market transformation and local partnerships. But we need a similar type of public partnership, which would take the form of basically authorizing legislation. States could just simply authorize energy districts to form at the local level, not mandatory, just an authorization. If volunteers so choose to organize them, then they would be recognized by the state and able to receive a very modest level of operating funding that then would be combined, ideally, from the state and federal level with the financial assistance and technical assistance flows of funds, much of which is already there. So we're not talking about a lot of new money, if any new money. For example, states that have ratepayer funded energy efficiency programs, a slice of that could go to support energy districts at the local level. Significant chunk could fund the technical assistance work that's already being done in some places, but oftentimes by state level contractors that have no local presence and no trusted sort of reputation at the community level. So we're trying to build this model that says, well, yes, actually, this could work in every county in the country. And it could work with a level of public and private partnership that, while it seems like a huge wall to climb to say, oh, we're going to do this in 3,000 counties, the reality is the models are already there. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's just following best practice from what we've seen in other areas.
Yeah, and you've clearly got quite a few sort of use cases and like you've got the model built out in quite a way that can be sort of moved elsewhere. And you mentioned that you do have one Wisconsin county with that county, and then also elsewhere. What sort of interest have you seen from other states in bringing that model to their localities?
Yeah, we've had a lot of good conversations, especially in more recent years, with energy groups, both state and local, in a lot of states, looking at, how are we doing this? What's the model? A lot of those organizations are already running with some of their own work, but in many cases, there may be a state level organization that's trying to figure out how to work locally. So, in the Wisconsin case, this was just a matter of clean energy champions sort of across the stream here, across the Mississippi River, seeing what's happening and saying we want to do that here too. In some states, we've had conversations around state level organizations saying, look, yeah, we really would love to have that local implementation structure that we could support. So, in some cases, it's those organizations starting to think about maybe how they could approach their state legislature to create some sort of authorizing legislation, and or to start at the opposite end and just start working with a few localities and saying, let's create an energy district and see how this goes. You got to find the funding to do that. So that's, yes, we have had a lot of good conversations. There obviously aren't more states with clean energy district associations like us yet. But certainly the knowledge is expanding. We've had a lot of interesting conversations with politicos as well, including from other states, talking about, what this would look like at the federal level. Well, at the federal level, having support would be super. But it's still something that needs to be organized, and it needs to be a locally led effort supported by state and feds, not just a federal bureaucracy. So, and again, going back to the soil and water conservation districts, that model isn't perfect, but it's pretty good because they work in partnership with state agricultural departments, generally conservation agencies. Like in Iowa, the Soil Conservation Service is their state agency partner. And then at the national level, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is part of USDA, is the federal agency tasked with helping landowners do conservation on private lands, on working lands. So the NRCS partners with all the state agencies, and together they partner with all these local soil and water districts, which sounds a little bit duplicative or complicated, but it's not. They actually all share the same office in virtually every county in the country. And so you have the local leadership being the trusted source of information, and the local representatives, and you have the state and federal government in supporting roles rather than just preaching roles and determining roles and directing roles. We could do the same thing here with energy.
To that end of kind of having the local expertise and the local advising, one thing I'm curious about is kind of in your work at the local level, what have you found that you think the national conversation is not picking up on?
Well, I think fundamentally, it's coming back to what I have said, is that we don't have an implementation infrastructure, which is not exclusive to this problem. I think too often in our policymaking endeavors, we think, let's pass a national law or maybe a state law and solve a problem. But when things take actual work to get done, and in energy, we're talking about every person lives in a home, every business is a building, every farm is a big energy user, every institution. These things are complicated. These systems are complicated, and change is hard. And it takes real people. It doesn't just happen by accident. I mean, Rocky Mountain Institute, for example, RMI, many of your listeners may be familiar, has been preaching about the energy efficiency opportunity for 4 decades or more? And, the $1 trillion opportunity, and we still have only accomplished a tiny, tiny sliver of it. Why? It's cost effective. But just because something's cost effective or the markets think, there's an opportunity, doesn't mean it happens. And in this case, energy is one of those cases where it really takes people, qualified people, to do the work with other people in their communities. And we have not realized that in the energy sphere. And a big part of that is leading with technical assistance, which is the biggest failure of the federal programs as we're seeing them now. I mean, even just take the IRA rebate programs that we're all still, hoping we'll be able to use. In Iowa, certainly they aren't open yet, but our energy office is trying. We know that they're working on them. and thank you for that. But even there, so there's a lot of rebate dollars available, and there's no earmarked specific pathway required to provide technical assistance. States are going to have to figure that out as they go, and some states are providing that and some states aren't. But it's kind of the cart before the horse when you throw money out there and you don't have an existing opportunity for households or businesses or whoever's eligible to actually get the technical assistance that would help them figure out, is this a good idea? Is this not a good idea? Where do I start? You know, those simple questions. That's about technical assistance, and we don't have universal technical assistance available, and we really believe we should.
It sounds like something like the clean energy districts may be able to help fill, a role there. So that may be something where we can.
We're trying. Yep.
Hope to see that coming in.
Yep.
Well, we're getting to time now, so I just want to go to our lightning round last question. If you had to summarize the outlook for clean energy districts in the next few years in one word, what would that word be?
Oh, lightning round. One word. I guess you would say aspirational. I'll leave it at that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Andy, for talking. This has been a really great conversation. I've really enjoyed learning about the clean energy districts and your work, and kind of see a lot of hope for this bridging the gap here between local and larger efforts, between funding and implementation, all of these kinds of things. So thank you, and thanks to our audience for joining us. You'll be able to find a recording of this episode and any of our past episodes anywhere you get your podcasts: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. And check out atlasbuildingshub.com to read our digests and data stories and to join our community. Stay tuned for a new episode of Buildings Hub Live next month, where we'll be taking a look back at the year in review. See you then.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Buildings Hub Live. You can listen to this episode and all other installments in our podcast on the Atlas YouTube channel, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. If you're interested in additional content, check out our data, articles, and dashboards on Buildings Hub at atlasbuildingshub.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you again soon.